go. We're thrilled tonight to be doing our music talk. Normally we do these every Tuesday before a major concert here at McNally in the Travel Alcove. So it's great actually to have this partnership with McNally Robinson Booksellers here on because we get to do this all year from McNally Robinson and bring it straight to you. If you don't know, I'm shocked you don't. McNally Robinson Booksellers is by far the best bookshop in all of Treaty 6 territory, quite frankly, so we're really thrilled that we get to be here. And really appropriate that we're in the Travel Alcove, because this season we are actually focusing all of our reimagined programming on musical travel.
That's right. We can't, most of us can't go places this year, so we're bringing those places to Saskatoon.
Yeah, and it's each concert is its own little musical adventure. And so it's going to be quite fun, actually. We should have actually faced this way so you can see all of the travel books. And we could have sat in front of Paris.
That's right. There's Paris, France over there.
There you go. Eric, how are you? We've seen each other lots. The audience has seen us very little over these last few months. So it's really nice to be back with an audience soon.
Yes.
It's been 6 full months since we got to make music together. What'd you do?
Did a lot of things. Like most people, it was a very unusual time. And so those 6 months, well, you and I know, there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes to change and to constantly change and reinvent what we're doing the whole time.
Yeah.
And so that's and in terms of work, we're all just constantly, okay, these are the new things. Oh, this is where we're going. Oh, this is where we're going. And I'm thrilled that those 6 months have culminated in putting on live music again,
right?
Because that was not always that was not a certain thing for sure. And so it's we had our first rehearsal last night with the full orchestra, or with most of it, and it was thrilling actually to make music again, because it's been over 6.5 months.
Yeah, it's been a very long time. Over 6.5 months. The Materna Requiem on March 7th was our very last event. So we're it's very strange to have taken that long, and it's I believe the longest amount of time this organization has gone without a concert since its inception.
I can't imagine it. Like there's no time. Even a really long summer is not that long.
No, not at all. This is our 90th season. We had a massive plan that took many years to put into place. Most programming of a season takes about 2 full years to execute. And so we had this brilliant season planned, and then we couldn't do it. So I know early on you and I were discussing the fact that it's time to completely reinvent what we could do, and that's why we ended up calling this 90th season Reimagining the Possibilities, because it truly is completely reimagined. Every single concert is completely different than we'd originally planned, and we're not used to programming on the fly. Normally we have all this time to kick ideas around, and quite often, as we've discovered, you'll program a concert and it'll kind of sit there for 5 or 6 months, and then, oh no, wait, we're going to change it. None of that with this. Every concert's planned about between 4 to 8 weeks ahead of time. So it's building the boat as we're sailing.
Exactly, and it's thrilling on one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin it's
exhausting.
Exhausting, yeah. And like you said, we're reimagining everything because of the restrictions of how many people we can have in the audience, but also on stage. That really affects the repertoire. So usually, like you said, this whole season we would have had 65 to 95 people on stage, and then with choirs and all of that. But this year, very different. And so, for instance, this coming Saturday we have about 25 people on stage or so, and but at the same time, we can think of other repertoire that we never really get to do or have the opportunity. Because when we have a full orchestra, of course, we program music that is with as many people as we can, or all these interesting works. But with 25 to 30, wow, then we can do new music and stuff that we don't usually get to do. So that's been really fascinating. And this week is a prime example. of some repertoire that, yeah, some of it is arranged, but others is originally for a smaller band, and come throughout the year we've got little things that are new and unique.
Yeah, and it is it's quite an opportunity actually to grasp, and I did enjoy the fact that we did really catch on to the innovation early on, and even in during the early part of the lockdown through May, as we did our online Beethoven festival, and over the course of that month we had over 30,000 people connect with the SSO online, whether it was the online concert, your Meet the Musicians interviews, our virtual Beat Beethoven fun run with Brain Sport. So it was really exciting and cool to be able to reimagine what we are able to do.
Well, and that's just it. It's a big mess, this whole thing all around the world. But what I love about the SSO is that, okay, this is the situation. Let's do something exciting with it, with what we have. And we've always had a strong social media presence, but it was pretty extraordinary how we just went nuts in those right at the beginning and throughout the up until now. Like you mentioned, the courses, the interviews, the concerts, all of that, and that is not something that's going to stop, because we say, oh, this, for instance, now we can, of course, we want people here, but there's so many different things that we didn't either hadn't thought of or didn't have the time or the wherewithal to put it all together, but we did over the last 6 months, and now that's exciting to carry those things forward alongside the live performances.
Yeah, exactly. And with our live performances, I mean, we're lucky because we do have about 120 in every concert this year. Every concert sold out, so we're full. But we do get to have the experience of live streaming everything through our digital concert stream.
And tell me about that. That is such a lot of work, exhaustive work to put that all together. But right now we're looking at cameras, and our wonderful person Simeon is working it all. How did this all come about?
We were really fortunate. The Bob Steen Foundation, Robert Steen Foundation, had reached out and were able to help us purchase equipment. And as we were trying to put together the concept of how we could create our own digital concert hall, it became clear owning the equipment, getting the right equipment, not just the right sound equipment, but also the right visual equipment to be able to create a really clear and adaptable setup so that we could change each concert, really. So it's a multi-camera system, and so at live streams you'll be able to watch all sorts of different views. We were testing it last night at rehearsal.
Looked amazing.
Yeah.
Looked amazing.
Yeah, and you don't even have to notice the cameras, which is nice.
Right.
And there's a camera pointed at you, and you couldn't even see it. So.
I did not actually even think about it until you showed me the tapes.
Yeah, so it actually gives a really unique, intimate experience with the music, and everything is live streamed, so you can watch it live as it happens on the Saturday nights throughout the year, and some Sunday afternoons. But then it's down. That live stream's up for 24 hours, and then it comes down. And then, if you're a subscriber to the digital concert stream, you are actually able to watch the concerts, the concert films as we release them, and they're edited together. They're composites of behind-the-scenes stuff, interviews. I know we've got a few musician interviews each time. Footage from around the city, from around the travel locations we're going to. So it's a really cool experience, and it's I'm really proud of what this team has accomplished, and a huge thanks to Simeon Taylor, who's our videographer now on staff, because it's been a mountain of work.
Yeah, just the stuff that you guys have put together over the last few weeks is pretty extraordinary, and yet, like you say, bravo to Simeon for that. And I love that we have 4 cameras going, and the edited version afterward is, if for instance the Debussy this Saturday and Sunday, there'll be a close-up, a beautiful, the highest HD close-up of Alison Miller playing that solo. And this is something that we've seen for years on the Berlin Philharmonic Digital Concert Hall, the Met Opera HD broadcasts. And it's so exciting that we have this here at the SSO and that we can use for years and years.
Yeah, it is very exciting. So, let's get to it. Postcards from Paris. This is our first big concert of the year. When we started the idea of travel destinations, Paris we just settled on it right away, real quick. Maybe because it's one of the ultimate travel destinations, but it also is one of the ultimate musical travel destinations. And I think what you've done with the program is really unique, because throughout the evening, it has a piece of great storytelling, musical storytelling, interwoven between other pieces, and the way you've set that up is really intriguing.
The like you say, the French music side of things, and to have a whole program of French music is pretty extraordinary, because a lot of the symphonic repertoire is, of course, German heavy, and we do play a lot of French music as well. But to focus on certain composers, and especially a lineage like Chevalier de Saint-Georges to Debussy to Ravel to Honegger is really extraordinary, because it kind of outlines the chronological evolution of French music from mid 1700s all the way up to the 20th century, and even the two pop pieces we're playing even a bit later. So that's pretty exciting. And you mentioned a bit of the rearranging of what we're doing. So we're doing Ravel, Ma Mère Loire, the suite, which was, of course, originally written for two pianos and then transcribed a year later.
Much better as a piano duet. It's much better as a piano duet.
The orchestration is extraordinary, because it was his alone, and him being one of the greatest orchestrators of all time. But these little vignettes, these movements are, of course, stories. We've got Tom Thumb, we've got the Empress of the Pagodas, we've got the Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, the Sleeping Beauty as well.
Yeah, and the Enchanted Forest. And so what I've done is put those movements spaced throughout the program, and then other French music, the other pieces in between it, so that we have this whole arc of the story.
Yeah. I also want to get a little feedback. I also want to mention that as we get going here, you can type your questions into the chat. They're actually being fed to me, so I'll be able to ask Eric and myself questions at the end of the show, so keep that up. Let's talk about Joseph Boulogne, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges, for a bit. What a unique and remarkable composer who, until the last 10, 15 years, was sort of forgotten, and such an incredible musical mind.
He was, and he wrote so much music, and like you say, really forgotten, basically, for a number of reasons. But he wrote a number of symphonies. He wrote a big number of violin concertos. He was an extraordinary violinist.
And a champion fencer.
One of the best, apparently,
yeah,
at that time. And so he was a composer. His father was a plantation owner in the Caribbean. His mother was a slave. And so he was raised a bit in the Caribbean and then brought over to France. And he was so famous in France during his lifetime that when Mozart visited France twice, once later in life, and Mozart was jealous of the Chevalier, and because of all this attention that he was getting, and also because of the great music that he was writing, and it's hinted at that Mozart might have taken a few themes here or there, or at least been inspired by a few themes of the Chevalier, of Joseph. And so it's great to bring this music back, and also to discover it, not just to rediscover it, but for us who are playing it, discover it, because it's a delight. And we're opening the program with one of his overtures, which is also one of the movements of his symphonies, and right off the bat, it just sparkles and gets you going.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal piece of music. We also have Saint-Georges to thank for he was the one who commissioned Haydn to write the Paris symphonies, and he conducted them the first time they were done in Paris.
That's right. Yeah. He knew everyone, of course, because everyone came to see him and to hear him, and it's interesting that so many other I mentioned the violin concertos, but the Paris symphonies, and Haydn, of course, wrote a violin concerto, and of course Mozart wrote 5, but Haydn only wrote 1, and Chevalier or Boulogne wrote so many more that we don't know. So it's too bad. It's too bad because those it would be wonderful to bring back and for people to play. And you're starting to get more and more played with different groups around the world.
Exactly. And the other thing that I find really fascinating about Saint-Georges is he was so, you can't look at his career without looking at Versailles, because so often he spent a lot of time at the court of Versailles. Marie Antoinette used to be his accompanist. So he was
think of that. That's just that
yeah.
sentence alone. That's pretty incredible.
Big deal. Yeah. So, and I believe this is the first time in our 90 years, the first time ever, that his music has been performed in Saskatoon. So it's a really exciting opportunity to kick off our year with Saint-Georges. The Ravel, we've touched on a little bit and how it's spelt out through the entire evening. One of the other pieces that kind of anchors the show is Pastoral d'été. Kind of perfectly timed, as summer has just left us and we're falling into fall. Honegger's music isn't played very often.
It's not played very often here,
right?
But in Europe, it's actually in France especially, it's played. And he actually died a very famous and well-known and relatively wealthy composer. But you're right. It's not like tip of the tongue like Debussy or Ravel. He was younger than Debussy and Ravel, but he was greatly inspired by them, and he became famous when he was young for writing something called Pacific 231, which is basically a work describing a steam engine. Right. And so he was fascinated by fast things and by engines and all that, and so that developed, and then of course he wrote a lot of operas, not of course, but he wrote a lot of operas, a lot of symphonies, and works that are still played there, but not much by the rest of us. And the Pastoral d'été is a beautiful work where he takes his own way. So French music, starting with Debussy, which the work we're going to discuss, kind of changed, was a very, very pivotal time in music. And from there, especially these French composers decided to do their own thing. And Honegger always stuck to his own thing. He would always, he loved mixing atonal with tonal. He loved changing forms up and just doing different things. And this is a beautiful piece that starts with a horn solo, and you can just feel the end of summer, and then the middle part, we've got some bells and we've got some other things going on that's a bit influenced by that 20th century music, and then it goes back into this gorgeous thing. And there's bird calls from the flute and the clarinet and all these other things. But it's a beautiful little vignette of a
and incredibly unique textures in the strings.
Yes,
very different than what you expect from French. Almost, it's uniquely, particularly in last night's rehearsal. I was noting that the texture, the orchestral texture that he gets from the string playing is pretty distinct.
It is, and this is a very rhythmic texture in terms of how he uses different rhythms. It's not always exact, but at the same time, there's a structure that French composers, especially from this era and just before, it's that combination of German and French. So the French always have tried to get away from that massive German influence, but there's always a bit of it. So Berlioz, Saint-Saëns is a perfect example, like his structures, and he, of course, detested Debussy and Ravel, and probably he died before Honegger was famous, but there's always, dare I say, that German influence, but it's always there. And so Honegger is this perfect example where it's very French with, like you just said, this German sort of rhythmic structure.
Yeah, he was part of Les Six.
Yes.
Les Six was a group of young composers in the first half of the 20th century in France who wanted to be known for their own achievements, not the achievements of the composers that came before them. They were a unique moment in music history. I mean, when you think of the departure that Debussy took from what we knew as big orchestral piano vocal music, into a new symbolist era, and the clarity of sound that both he and Ravel achieved in their writing. Les Six, they had each six had a distinct voice. I mean, Honegger and Poulenc are by far the most famous, and probably rightfully so. Frankly, they wrote some pretty spectacular music, but they had a unique influence on the next era of Paris music.
Yeah, and it was a definitely that whole Western European time was a changing time. It was, the first half of the 20th century with Schoenberg in Germany and the Second Viennese School and all that influencing everything. And another of the Les Six was Milhaud. Yeah, and Milhaud's music became more well known later. He was actually kind of envious of Honegger and Poulenc. Well, Poulenc became very well known. But you're right. They're so distinct. Poulenc is more accessible, I guess, in certain ways. Honegger had a mix of them. Milhaud was a bit more experimental in different ways, and so all their distinct roles. But they influenced the Boulezes and the generation that came after them.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about Debussy's Prélude de l'après-midi d'un Faun, and good to lead in with Boulez, because Pierre Boulez, the great conductor, composer, said that modern music started with the prelude, and that the flute intro breathed new life into music. Although Debussy's music, people talk about how he didn't really find his voice until his 40s, which was in the early 1902, 1904, with Pelléas et Mélisande and La Mer. In 1894, we have a perfectly good example of a composer who had found his voice, who had everyone sit up and take notice. What I find fascinating about the Afternoon of a Faun is this is the moment when music changed, because Mahler was ripping apart how we knew the orchestra to be. He was writing his Resurrection Symphony, the Second Symphony, that same year, I believe, came out. Brahms was soon dead, had quit writing orchestral music for sure. And Debussy comes along and turns what should have been, by all understanding of music theory, a tense composition, and turns it into one of the most remarkable moments of ecstasy.
Mm-hmm. And it was almost not by accident, but just sheer for the beauty of it. Mm-hmm. And that's what you get when you hear this piece, and this is what happened when a lot of people heard it, because he definitely had his detractors. Like I said, Saint-Saëns was vehemently against Debussy and Ravel after that, and thought this is atrocious what they're writing. But it's completely new, and it is descriptive, but that wasn't his point at all. He wrote it, of course, for inspired, I guess, by the poem by Mallarmé. And apparently Mallarmé said at first, when he heard that Debussy was writing a piece for...
He was against it.
He was against it. He was like, you can't do this. And then when he heard the first performance, he was delighted.
Yeah, and he wrote Debussy saying something like, "I press my flesh in yours."
That's right.
With such, he was just so blown away by it.
He said it went way beyond his poem.
Yeah.
And Debussy had originally thought he was going to add an intro and add another movement, so a 3-movement thing. But it, what it is this gorgeous piece. And when we just normally think of French music, we say, oh, it's so rhythmically kind of out of time and just doing its own thing. But the beautiful thing, and Debussy started it, basically, is that it was so incredibly well written and very exact in his what he wanted in detail, that it sounds like it's improvised. And I've always found when French music like that, Debussy and Ravel, is played too much trying to do this, it loses all of its context, it loses its motion. And when you actually play generally what what Debussy wrote is this. It comes out like it's improvised.
Yeah, well, and Debussy, what Debussy wrote was exceptionally clear. I mean, talk about flawless, impeccable scores. They were remarkable. How clean his music was. He knew exactly how he wanted that music to be played.
And when it was first played, the musicians and the critics were they're almost shocked because nothing like this had come before. So, like you said, it was a breath air, and they almost wanted to say something like, "Well, no, this isn't the way it's supposed to be," but it is, and that kind of sums up what Saint-Saëns was. No, that's not what it's supposed to be, but it is, and it's gorgeous, and it works extremely well.
Yeah, most people, I know when I grew up learning music as a young pianist, I thought that Debussy was an impressionist. Debussy himself hated the phrase, and as I grew within my own musical learning, I realized, Debussy is a symbolist. He is not an impressionist. He is completely unlike the mad and frantic brushstrokes of Monet. He has a crystalline clarity to what he's trying to accomplish, and not just in his orchestral music. I mean, his piano music is as detailed. His vocal music is intoxicating. There's a whole language that he created, unique and complex to his own writing.
Yeah, and you use the word clarity, and that's exactly right. It's not wayward. You mentioned his vocal music, his piano music, his string quartet. A prime example where it's very concise. The subjects are developed in a certain way, and it just works from beginning to end. It's not like anything we had heard before in terms of that sort of writing. And Ravel, that came after or was 12 years younger than Debussy, he had a bit more. He had a more traditional structure, and he took a lot longer to compose than Debussy and others. But Debussy, it was his own path, and very, very clear about it. And distractions, he just put those aside and laid it down in a beautiful way.
Much like the poem that he was inspired by, that has stanzas and blockings of thought. Although it can be really easy to dismiss the complexity of this piece because it doesn't sound needlessly complex. There are musical cells. He writes with motives isn't the right word because it's not the same as the Wagnerian motives, but they're musical cells. They're almost living little things that he manipulates to create what he wants. It's exceptionally complex, this piece. The opening phrase is amongst the most important and famous music ever written. 3 bars of a flute solo that I believe goes. We're supposed to be in E flat, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be. But we don't end that phrase in E flat.
No.
And we outline the tritone in that opening moment. Every other composer before him outlining the tritone was a creation of tension, was a creation of drama, and kind of sinister drama often. But here he uses that opening phrase to relax all the tension in the room. You can't help but kind of drop your shoulders in calm as it opens.
Well, and you mentioned Wagner. He was inspired by Wagner, and Wagner's the tritone. So the tritone is not a perfect fifth, and it's not a perfect fourth. It's right between the fourth and the fifth. And Wagner wrote, of course, the Tristan chord, which is a tritone-based chord, and then he resolves it. And like you say, tritones are usually resolved. It was called the devil's chord before because there's all this tension. And with the opening of the Debussy, he first of all chooses the flute, and it's the afternoon, and he's the character, if you want to go along with the story, is just wandering through the woods, trying to engage with nymphs and others. And
family show. This is a family show. So
yes.
Go read the poem.
Yeah, and so but like you say, there's in this mischievous tritone-based devil's chord, there's a relaxedness of it, which is completely different than what you would then
we're having a little bit of audio difficulty, so I apologize to everyone at home. This is the first time we've had this set up, so we seem to be doing okay now. We'll keep going.
And so these 3 bars open gorgeous flute solo, and then excuse me, and then the strings, of course, he writes beautifully shimmering strings, and the other winds come in, and just like you say, kind of develops, not motive-like. He was inspired by Wagner, but he liked to think that Wagner was.
Oh. Just hold on 1 second, please.
Hello? There we go.
And I'm not on. We're just hold on 1 second.
I think you can hear me. We're just 1 second away from normality.
I think I'm back. I'm back. I will be very careful. Don't know what seems to be the problem, so.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're back.
We'll give it a go.
Let's do it. Anyway, Wagner, he said, was the ending of an era, and his music was the beginning, or others following him was the beginning.
Yeah, and you can hear that. I mean, you know, Tristan doesn't resolve for 5 hours with that Tristan chord and Wagner. This, in a way, never needs to resolve. The clarity with which he writes the piece never requires you to feel the resolution, because he weaves that throughout. And it's pretty fascinating. Now, this piece is normally scored for a massive orchestra, 2 harps,
3 flutes,
cor anglais?
English horn, all that.
It's normally a large orchestra. We are doing a reduction. Orchestral reductions are used to allow for just such an occasion, and many composers write their own reductions. Mahler, Schoenberg, they all wrote reductions of their own things. This is a pretty beautiful reduction, I have to say. What's the different in approach for the conductor, writing in terms of, or conducting in terms of how it's written for the reduction?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the arranger is someone you have to respect in their own right, not just the composer. So when Ian Farrington is the arranger of this music, you have to get into their mind a bit as well, not just the composers. And you, of course, we know the original and have conducted the original, but to bring those sounds in, and the arranger, if they're really good, like this person is, those sounds come in. And it depends, of course, on acoustics and different things. But and if they're not necessarily coming through, or not necessarily representing the original, you have to adjust that, and you have to balance it in certain ways. But Ian does a wonderful job of just bringing it all together. And there's a few different things, but I think in this acoustic they work beautifully.
Yeah, the acoustic at St. John's actually is truly remarkable. It's a beautiful space, and perfect for us this year. It has a very large open space at the front, so we can put a reduced orchestra in there, socially distanced. All of the strings are wearing masks. The winds themselves have UV filtration systems and plastic plexiglass screens between them. But we're able to fit in there, and that acoustic actually does play beautifully in the room. I often think it's great to pair Ravel and Debussy together, not actually thematically, but in terms of their sound. I mean, they're so different, particularly to those of us in the music industry. But non-musicians don't necessarily think of their music as being completely different. They think of them as being very similar. And they weren't all that many years apart in age.
Just 12.
Yeah, and you know, Debussy was already out of the conservatoire by the time Ravel was being kicked out of the conservatoire. Both of them sort of removed for being reckless and endangering lives with experimental music. Now we don't think of their music as experimental. What impact did they have? I mean, both as orchestrators, as composers, as manipulators of what we understood music to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mentioned before with Ravel as an orchestrator, he's known as one of those extraordinary um, orchestrators who he himself did some incredible arranging. He did Mussorgsky's Pictures and Exhibition for orchestra that we all, most of us, use that and have for decades.
Another piano piece. Just want to point that out.
And so, but that influence of the different colors. It opened everyone that came after them to different colors, to different things. Debussy, of course, he heard composers of his time. He heard Rimsky-Korsakov live in concert. Rimsky-Korsakov, along with Ravel, it's also known as a great orchestrator. Not necessarily the greatest composer ever, but the sounds and the way to use instruments. And that is an extraordinary thing about French music from this time onward, is how they used those instruments, how they used ancient thumb cymbals, how they used the piano in certain ways, how they used harp, everything. Of course, they were used before, but they were incorporating a lot of these sounds. Like Debussy heard the gamelan instruments at the expo in Paris, and so he said, hold on, I can use this in certain ways. Not necessarily exactly that way, but that opened up a whole new color palette for people to come.
It did, and you know, that kind of musical manipulation that Debussy was doing, inspired by the gamelan, today we would probably understand, frankly, as cultural appropriation. Then he was truly exploring a sound that was completely new to Europe. They had never heard anything like this. They never had the opportunity to in Paris, and so he was exploring that, and it did change his own writing. He never really tried to imitate or recreate the gamelan. He tried to recreate the sound, the open construct of scales. Mm-hmm. He played with scales in such a unique way. Ravel not so much, but they both had their own huge impact on where music went.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and a few of the massive innovators of the 20th century were French. You know, Satie, Boulez, all of them, and avant-garde and experimental music. Debussy and Ravel were known as avant-gardists in their own time, especially by those who did not like them. But the true avant-garde, or not the true, the really experimental stuff came after that, and France was definitely a leader in that.
Yeah. We've got a question from the audience coming in. Do you think that Debussy's actually better known for his piano, potentially also his vocal music, than his orchestral? I think he's very well known for Clair de Lune. It's heartbreaking for me as a pianist. I've played both the piano solo as well as the vocal piece. I wish more people knew the vocal piece. His vocal music is among the most satisfying music an artist can put together. As a pianist, but also as a singer, I know there's such detail and challenge. You know, in his Chanson de Billetis, you can actually hear the piano actually plays the clomping of the goat's hooves. It's so detailed. Mm-hmm. More famous as I mean, you will say orchestra because you love it. Yeah.
I mean, I depending on what you listen to, but I think in terms of, you know, La Mer but you know, combination Pelléas et Mélisande, you know, it was his only opera. But it made him famous, and it's
very depressing. Also, just so you know, it's not a toe tapper,
right? But it's, you know, it's in the repertoire. But in terms of orchestras, you know, when you go to the thousands of orchestras around the world, they're bound to play La Mer. They're bound to play the Prélude, these pieces. In terms of other instrumentations, the string quartet. Debussy wrote one string quartet. He also wrote a few other chamber music pieces, but
Ravel also wrote one string quartet.
That's right. And
you get it right the first time. You don't need to do it again.
You're done. And so a lot of string players know him because of that, but also because of the violin sonata and so the 6 sonatas. He only completed 3. That was at the end of his life. He wanted to produce those. So not necessarily like a Beethoven who's like, this is all my music. Debussy had his way with certain elements.
Yeah. And achieved brilliance with all of them, frankly. with all of them. One of the questions that's come in is, why are some of this weekend's composers, like Saint-Georges, not played often in North America? Saint-Georges' music, I mean, it's very hard to find. This was, even finding this weekend's music was, with the parts, literally the orchestral parts to perform was tricky. Yeah. Why do some people get left behind and not remembered?
In this particular instance, great question. First of all, there are so many composers, or at least there were, throughout history that we don't know about at all, or rarely hear. We know the big ones. We know Haydn, we know Mozart, Schubert, Schumann. Few of the lesser ones that are in there, like Telemann in the Baroque. And of course, he's famous, but Bach and Handel are so much more famous. So there are a lot of composers during their time that are even more famous than the ones that we necessarily or might know today. But there are certain factors. First of all, women composers. Of course, there are women composers, but if you're not encouraged, or even when you're told,
if you are,
even when you're told at 15 or 16, that's it, your education's done. Of course, you don't have 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years of a career to make it well known. In St. George's instance, he was a man of color. He was black. And that, of course, I can only assume at the time was of course very unusual, but also a novelty to certain people, but his music was extraordinary and spoke for itself. But as we all know, the history of discrimination and racism and built into the systems over the years, and classical music is no exception. And so those some of these composers, almost all of them, go by the wayside, and even if they're well known in their time.
Yeah, and some of the famous composers are remembered because of the work that their families did. Sometimes the work that their publishers did to make money off their death. I often think of Chopin's sister, who Chopin wanted a massive amount of his music destroyed. And that was one of the wishes on his deathbed, and then his sister decided, well, there's some money to be made here, and without her, we wouldn't probably have as much. There were friends of his also that did that. So in a lot of cases, like you say, the systemic racism, the systemic inequalities in the classical music systems removed people from history. And I'm grateful that our industry is working very hard to bring these voices back to life, and thankful that there is remnants of it so that we can actually play it. This is the first time we've played Saint-Georges here in Saskatoon. It will not be the last. It's great. People are going to love it. Mm-hmm. They're going to be blown away. Yeah. Is the sound any different for the socially distanced orchestra? This is a great question.
I'll say. The question is great. Last night we had a string rehearsal, and we had to, of course, all the string players, every player has their own stand. So when you'll see it on the video or when you're there in person, you'll notice that no one shares a stand. Everyone has their own thing, own music. They all have to change their pages together.
It's a big deal for string players. It is. String players do not like to turn their own pages.
And they're constantly playing, so you have to stop to do it. I didn't know what to expect when you get in front, and I'm also distanced from everyone. We all have masks on, so I can't see the expression of players. They can't see my expression, only through my eyes. And that sound was wonderful last night. Even it was distant, and we have the first violins in a line. It's not really a clump. It is a clump, but more of a line. So things are different. But what I've found, or at least in the last week or so, week and a half, is that musicians really have to listen, because you can't just rely and feel that person beside you. So there's a lot of listening, it seems to me, going on, and a lot of awareness. And it's interesting with the winds. We're going to be a bit closer with the plexiglass, but those, of course, are a bit more distant than the others. And to have them, to give a cue to Allison, who's, way over an outlook, is a bit of it's unusual. It's unusual.
Yeah, because so all the strings are sitting 2 meters apart. You are 2 meters from the closest string player, Michael and Lonnie, and so then from them there's another 2 meters, and then from that person there is over 12 feet to the winds. So it's a big challenge. Do you have to make bigger movements?
I think it's just that awareness that's happening, that people are just, seems to be more aware, that you kind of have to do it in a way. So who knows whether they'll get bigger, my movements will get bigger or smaller, but it seems to be working so far.
Yeah. We did have a question come in. Why did we pick Paris? Good question. I'll let you answer it.
No.
When we started thinking about travel, about musical travel, about how we could bring together this theme throughout the year, one of the things that's challenging for all of us is none of us are going on vacations. So we thought, well, let's create musical vacations. And Paris sprung to mind simply, I think, because it's such a brilliant... Paris isn't a city; it's an entire world, right? There, I forget who said that, but it's a very famous quote, and it's a very specific idea. It's not just a location; it's a pastry, it's a wine, it's the casualness of their exceptional sense of style. Paris is sort of everything, and their music is as well. It's so complex and yet simple.
There's a effortlessness to it, and
a charm.
Exactly, and like you say, when you think of Paris, you don't just think of another city. You think of this experience. You're like, oh, let's go to Paris, and like, as we talked about at the top of the show, and you just mentioned, we can't go to these places right now, and maybe we wouldn't go to Paris like next month, but eventually we all, people want to go to Paris or different locations, and so to try to bring that experience and that essence for a week here, that's what we're trying to capture, and that's the feel, with also the other things, like you said, the interviews and the different things surrounding the concerts. That's what we're trying to do.
And with each of these travel destinations, we are trying to include the voices that we haven't heard. Like Saint Georges. I know in a concert later this fall, we're going to have a travel destination that includes a pretty significant work of a female composer's who I'm sure has never been played in Saskatoon ever before. It's pretty. Pardon me. That's my mic seems to have some issues. There we go. Okay, so it does. It allows us to have some pretty exciting opportunities to play not only very familiar music like the Debussy, like the Ravel, but also stuff off the beaten path, and that's sort of what we do at the SSO. We try very hard to bring music to our audience that isn't exactly common fare. Mm-hmm. Well, this is another great question that I sort of just answered. But what does this new reimagined season allow you to do that other seasons don't?
That's just it. We can play. We can play with different not only the repertoire but how we present it. Of course, we can do that, and we have done that for years. Of having different themes, having different experiences. People from all around Saskatchewan, the province, from our community, from the country, come in and highlight different things. But this gives us a chance through technology and through a unique to us, and unique to a lot of large orchestras, stuff that we wouldn't normally do. And so that we're almost allowed to, because of what's happening, we're allowed to say, hey, hold on, let's do this, because we're restricted. We've got the opportunity to use a smaller group, and that opens up another whole world.
Yeah, we chose very early on, in early April, that we were going to innovate, and we were going to use this moment as an opportunity, not as a challenge. And so we did, and I think it's been pretty incredible. The other thing, it has allowed a flexibility of which I don't know that other orchestras get to enjoy. Am I back? I'm back. we'll fix this. We're back here in 2 weeks' time for our next music talk from McNally, which is all about Paris of the Prairies.
Mm-hmm.
You're with us for these first 2 months here for all of the first 3 concerts. So we're really thrilled to start the season off, to get going. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and have a really great night. A huge thank you to McNally Robinson.
Yes, thank you.
And join us this weekend from Postcards from Paris. Thanks so much.
Everyone.